Imagine a place where summer heat reaches 50 degrees. The ground dries out and cracks, and water is worth its weight in gold. Farms operate in conservation mode. Irrigation runs on a strict schedule. Livestock get water whenever possible, and in small towns, running water is a rarity because supplies are limited. For parts of remote Australia, this is already everyday reality. Prolonged droughts and rare brief rains turned these territories into desert. That is exactly why, for many years now, people have been asking the same question. A new water source is needed, one that does not depend on seasons or rainfall. But how do you do that? Where do you find fresh water in the desert? Stay with us, because this is going to get interesting. Australia is the driest inhabited continent on the planet. About 70% of its territory falls into arid and semi-arid zones. Rainfall is scarce, rivers run dry, and underground water reserves are being used up faster than they can be replenished. South Australia knows drought better than most. The Murray River, the main water artery of the region, has dropped to such low levels several times over the past 20 years that seawater began pushing into its mouth. That is dangerous for crops, for livestock, and for urban water supplies. The problem is not that there is no rain at all. Rain does come, but it falls unevenly. Sometimes a single season brings so much rain that flooding occurs. Then a year or two passes with almost no rainfall at all. That kind of instability is worse than a steady drought because you cannot predict it and you cannot simply plan around it. The northern parts of South Australia are especially vulnerable. Mining operations run there, along with farmers and people in small towns. All of them depend on water, and all of them are competing for the same resource. Mines consume water in enormous quantities. Farmers suffer from shortages when it comes to irrigation. And in the towns, people just want something to drink. The first thing that comes to mind is filling the inland lakes. Australia has Lake Eyre, one of the largest in the country. You might think it is a ready-made reservoir, but Lake Eyre sits below sea level. It is salty, and most of the time it is nearly dried out. When water does make it there, it evaporates quickly. Evaporation is the #1 enemy of open water bodies in a dry climate. In hot, arid air, a lake covering several square kilometers can lose as much water in a year as an entire city uses in several months. So building large open reservoirs in the desert is just an expensive way to evaporate both the resource and the money. The second obvious answer is groundwater. Australia has the Great Artesian Basin, a massive underground water reserve stretching beneath several states. People started tapping it back in the 19th century, and for a long time, it seemed like the supply was practically endless. But the basin replenishes very slowly. That water accumulated over thousands of years, and people began pumping it out over just a few decades. In some areas, pressure in the wells has already dropped. On top of that, the water there is often salty or loaded with minerals and concentrations that make it unfit for drinking or irrigation. There is another problem with groundwater. It supports unique ecosystems. Some artesian springs are home to species of fish and invertebrates found nowhere else on the planet. If the pressure drops and a spring dries up, those creatures are gone forever. So you simply cannot just keep pumping. Against this backdrop, the Northern Water Project emerged. The idea is straightforward. Build a desalination plant on the coast, then run a pipeline north to the mining regions and towns of Australia. The distance from the coast to the endpoint is around 350 kilometers. Desalinating seawater is based on a method called reverse osmosis. It is not complicated chemistry, and it is not magic. Water is forced under high pressure through membranes with very fine pores. Salt and impurities stay on one side, and clean water passes through. This method is used all over the world right now. Australia already has experience with these kinds of plants. Perth runs a large desalination facility that supplies a significant portion of the city. Melbourne and Sydney have similar facilities as well, so the technology is proven. The question is not whether it works, but how much it costs and who benefits. One of the quirks of this kind of treatment is that the resulting water ends up too pure. It lacks the minerals that people need. So before it goes into the pipes, it has to be remineralized with calcium, magnesium, and other elements added back in. That is an extra step, extra equipment, and extra cost. Now, about the pipeline. Laying a pipeline several hundred kilometers long across the Australian outback is not just a construction project. It is a genuine expedition. The roads out there are unpaved. Equipment overheats. Workers have to be brought in from far away and provided with housing, food, and communications right on site. Air temperatures in summer can hit 50 degrees out there. Metal structures expand and warp. Laying the pipe requires accounting for thermal expansion, otherwise cracks will appear at the joints within a few years. That is not just theory. Those are lessons already learned from building other pipelines in Australia. Maintaining the pipeline after it is built is another serious challenge. Pumping stations are needed every few dozen kilometers because water does not flow uphill on its own. Those stations need electricity. They need staff to check on the equipment. All of that costs money every single year, not just during construction. Electricity for the desalination plant and the pumping stations is one of the most expensive line items. Reverse osmosis requires high pressure, which means a lot of energy. If that energy comes from coal or gas-fired power stations, the environmental footprint of the project ends up being pretty significant. That is exactly why projects like this are increasingly talking about connecting solar panels or wind turbines. South Australia already leads the country in its share of renewable energy. If the plant runs on solar and wind, the environmental impact drops considerably. But building that kind of infrastructure also requires serious investment. Now, about the money. Early cost estimates for the Northern Water Project come in at around 2 billion Australian dollars. That is a very large sum. You cannot simply pull it from the state budget. You need either federal funding or private investors, or both at the same time. Mining companies in the region are willing to pay for water because without it, their operations grind to a halt. But they want long-term contracts with fixed prices. The government wants flexibility. That is a classic conflict of interests, and it drags negotiations out for years. There is another risk that specialists call the pipeline without buyers problem. If you build the infrastructure and then a major mine shuts down or production stops because metal prices fall, the pipeline ends up underused. The maintenance costs do not go away. That is a serious financial risk, especially for the government. There is also the question of brine. With reverse osmosis, roughly half the volume of seawater processed becomes waste in the form of a highly concentrated salt solution. You have to put it somewhere. Usually it gets discharged back into the ocean. But if that is done carelessly, marine organisms in the discharge zones start dying off. Studies conducted near such plants in various countries have shown that with proper brine dispersal, the harm to the ecosystem is minimal. But that requires correctly designed discharge pipes and continuous monitoring. If you cut corners on that, the effects on the coastal environment can become quite noticeable.
Indigenous Australians, the people who have called these lands home for thousands of years, are also part of this process. Parts of the pipeline route run through land that holds cultural and spiritual significance for Aboriginal communities. Any construction there requires their consent, and those negotiations move slowly.
Some communities see opportunity in the project. If working infrastructure appears nearby, there will be jobs and maintenance contracts. Others worry that construction will disturb places that should not be touched. Finding a balance between those two positions is difficult and takes time. Environmentalists generally support the idea of reducing pressure on rivers and groundwater, but they insist on strict monitoring of the consequences. Their concern is not the technology itself, but the scale. When a plant is large and runs around the clock, even minor violations of standards add up over time. Alongside the major pipeline, other approaches are being developed in the region. Recycling treated wastewater is already a reality in several Australian cities. That water is used for irrigation, industrial needs, and even to replenish groundwater reserves. It is cheaper than desalination and gentler on the environment. Smart water networks are another direction. Sensors on pipes and meters allow real-time monitoring for leaks. In older urban networks, up to 20% of water is lost through damaged pipes right underground. That is not an exception. That is the standard situation in many cities around the world. For the most remote towns where no pipeline will ever reach, local solutions are being developed. One of them is pulling water out of thin air. Specialized units condense moisture and collect it. In the desert, this is not a primary source, but as a backup option for a small town, it is a workable one. Rainwater harvesting with large storage tanks is also being considered. In areas where rain is rare but does happen, a single downpour can fill up a week's supply. It does not require complex equipment. The downside is unreliability. If there is no rain for several months, the tank is empty. Combining multiple sources is what specialists are leaning toward. Not one big plant, but a mix of solutions. Desalination for industry, recycled water for irrigation, local solutions for remote locations. A system like that is more resilient because if one part fails, the others keep working. The Northern Water Project is moving slowly. Studies have been underway since the late 2000s. Negotiations with communities, environmental assessments, discussions with business, all of that takes years. By the mid-20s, no final decision to begin construction had been made. That is a typical story for large water infrastructure projects. The world has examples of more decisive action. Israel turned seawater desalination into its primary source of drinking water over several decades of focused effort. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have had such plants running for a long time, supplying a large portion of their populations. But they built and invested consistently, without delays. Australia takes a different path. It has a strong system of local self-government, independent states, and competing interests. Every few years, a new government comes in with slightly different priorities. Long-term infrastructure projects in a system like that move at a leisurely pace. Meanwhile, the climate is not waiting. Droughts in Australia are getting longer and more severe. The period from 2017 through 2019 hit the southeastern part of the country extremely hard. Rivers shrank, reservoirs emptied, and water restrictions were imposed in several cities. Farmers take direct losses during periods like that. There is nothing to water the livestock with, and crops die. Some operations in the northern regions simply do not survive the dry years. Owners either go into debt or sell the land. These are not figures from a report. These are real families and real generations. The mining industry is more resilient to drought because it has more resources and can afford to buy water at high prices. But that creates additional pressure on the shared resource. When mines compete with farmers for groundwater, farmers lose more often than not. That creates tension between rural communities and big business. The government tries to manage this through a water rights system. Every user gets an approved allocation, but in dry years, quotas get cut, and then the fighting starts. Large companies hire lawyers and defend their interests. A small farmer does not have those kinds of resources. Water rights have actually become one of the reasons the pipeline discussion has dragged on so long. If a new water source comes online, the rights have to be divided up all over again. Who gets access first? Who pays more? Those questions do not get resolved by simple legislation. They get worked out through political negotiations. There is one more aspect that rarely gets talked about. A seawater desalination plant requires constant care for its membranes. Membranes wear out and need to be replaced every few years. The chemicals used to flush them have to be shipped in. That entire supply chain creates a dependency on logistics and on global material prices. If there are supply disruptions or a sharp price spike, the cost of water from a plant like that can go up noticeably. In regions where water is already expensive, that creates serious strain. That is why specialists insist that seawater desalination should supplement other sources, not replace them entirely. Still, research and preparatory work continue. Engineers are studying the soil composition along the pipeline route, checking data on ground conditions, and calculating where to place the pumping stations. It is quiet work that does not make headlines, but without it, the project will not move an inch. At the global level, interest in projects like this is growing. Water is becoming a strategic resource. Countries that have learned to pull it from the ocean or return it to circulation through treatment are proving more resilient to climate shocks. Australia, with the right approach, could become a model for other arid regions of the planet. Australian scientists, engineers, and politicians understand this. But understanding and action are different things. Between the decision to build and actual water coming out of a tap, many years and several governments pass. That is not a criticism. That is the reality of large infrastructure projects in complex political systems. The Northern Water Project, if it does get built, could reshape the water supply map of South Australia. Mining regions would get a stable resource. Pressure on rivers and groundwater would ease. That matters for the environment because the rivers would have a chance to gradually recover. If the project is never completed, the region will keep depending on unreliable sources. Droughts will bring recurring crises, restrictions, and losses. The problem is not going away. It will only get worse because Australia's climate keeps changing. This whole story is about the cost of living somewhere water is scarce, and about the fact that no engineering solution comes easy when it involves hundreds of kilometers of pipe, years of negotiations, and billions of dollars. Leave a comment below. Is it worth spending that many resources for water at the edge of a continent? Or is there a better way?